The emergency meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the campus chapel. Sam barely slept that night, his mind racing between prayers for mercy and thoughts of Nancy. He had finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and now Judgment Day had arrived. Walking into the chapel, Sam felt the weight of every eye upon him. The campus Christian Council members sat in a solemn row, their faces grave. Among them was Pastor Johnson, his spiritual mentor since his first year. The disappointment in the older man's eyes cut deeper than any rebuke could. "Brother Sam," the council chairman began, "we've received multiple reports about your conduct with a certain sister in your fellowship. Your assistant leaders have also expressed concerns about significant changes in your spiritual leadership." As they laid out the evidence, the late-night meetings, the inappropriate closeness, the neglected fellowship duties, Sam saw his ministry crumbling before his eyes. But the worst was yet to come. "There's something else you should know," Pastor Johnson said quietly. "Nancy isn't just a student seeking spiritual guidance. She's been involved in similar situations in 3 other campus fellowships. She has a history of targeting leaders." The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. All those intimate conversations, those seemingly vulnerable moments, had been calculated moves in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He thought he was helping her, but she had been slowly, deliberately, drawing him away from his calling. Later that afternoon, Sam received a message from Nancy. "I guess the game is up. Don't worry, you're not the first leader to fall for it, won't be the last either. Thanks for the entertaining semester." The message's casual cruelty forced Sam to his knees. For the first time in months, real tears of repentance flowed as he realized how far he had fallen. The council's decision was merciful but firm. He would step down from leadership and undergo a period of spiritual restoration under Pastor Johnson's guidance. That Sunday, Sam sat in the back row of the fellowship hall watching his assistant lead the service. The same members who once looked to him for spiritual guidance now avoided his gaze. Nancy was nowhere to be seen. She had already moved on to her next target at another fellowship. As the worship team sang about restoration, Sam finally understood the true nature of temptation. It wasn't just about attraction or desire, it was about pride. His confidence in his own spiritual strength had been his greatest weakness. "God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble," Pastor Johnson had told him during their first restoration session. "Your fall from leadership isn't the end, Sam. Sometimes God allows us to fall so we can learn to stand again, not in our own strength, but in His." 3 weeks into his restoration period, Sam's spiritual life showed signs of renewal. His prayer life had intensified, and the daily fasting helped him focus on rebuilding his relationship with God. Pastor Johnson noted the positive changes in their weekly counseling sessions, proud of his mentee's apparent progress. But beneath the surface of this spiritual revival, a subtle battle raged on. Late one night, after an intense prayer session, Sam's finger hovered over his phone's recycle bin. Nancy's photos were still there, technically deleted but not quite gone, much like his feelings for her. He had convinced himself that keeping them in the recycle bin wasn't the same as keeping them in his gallery. It was a small compromise, he reasoned, a tiny concession to his weakness. "Delete them permanently," his conscience whispered. But another voice, one that had grown familiar during his time with Nancy, suggested, "Just in case, you might want to remember the lesson learned." During his fasting periods, when his spirit felt strongest, he would almost tap the empty recycle bin button. But something always held him back. It was the same hesitation that made him keep her number, though he'd renamed it Do Not Answer in his contacts. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone settings, he accidentally opened the recycle bin. Nancy's photos appeared. Her smile, those carefully posed shots, the candid moments he'd saved from her profile. His finger trembled as he zoomed in on one particular image. The familiar warmth of temptation began to spread through his chest. "It's just a picture," he told himself. "I'm stronger now. I can handle looking without falling." But even as he formed these thoughts, he recognized them. They were the same justifications he'd used before, dressed in new clothes. The same pride that had led to his fall was creeping back, disguised as spiritual confidence. His phone suddenly lit up with a message. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought it might be from Nancy. Instead, it was his mother. "Son, remember what Pastor Johnson said. Complete deliverance requires complete separation. Sam stared at his mother's message, then back at the recycle bin. He realized he was standing at another crossroads. His 3 weeks of prayers and fasting had strengthened him. Yes, but true victory wouldn't come until he removed every trace of compromise from his life. Yet his thumbs still hesitated over the empty recycle bin button. The battle wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Saturday evening found Sam exhausted on his bed. The day's fellowship activities had drained him completely. His Bible lay open beside him, marking day 20 of his 21-day prayer assignment, but his eyes kept closing. "I've been in fellowship all day," he reasoned with himself. "Surely that counts for something. One missed evening won't matter." It was in this moment of spiritual vulnerability, when his defenses were at their lowest, that his phone buzzed with a WhatsApp notification. Nancy's name appeared on the screen. His heart raced as he saw it was a voice note. Common sense told him to delete it immediately, but curiosity, that same fatal curiosity that had started his downfall, whispered louder. "Just listen," it said. "What harm could it do?" With trembling fingers, he pressed play. Nancy's voice came through, broken with sobs. "Sam, I'm so sorry." The sound of her crying felt genuine, raw. "I need you to know I wasn't always like this. I never meant to hurt you." Sam sat up, his exhaustion forgotten. Her voice continued, heavy with emotion. "The truth is, I've been carrying my own wounds. Every young preacher I targeted, it was because of something that happened to me years ago." She paused, catching her breath between sobs. "But you were different, Sam. When I came to your apartment that night, every other preacher I'd met alone had tried to take advantage of me. But you actually cared about my soul." Her words struck a chord in Sam's heart. The photos in his recycle bin seemed to burn through his phone, reminding him of his own unresolved feelings. "I've been going through my own spiritual journey," Nancy continued, "and I realize now how much damage I've caused, especially to someone as genuine as you. Can you ever forgive me?" The voice note ended, leaving Sam in dangerous silence. Her words replayed in his mind. "You were different." Pride, his old enemy, began to stir again. The same pride that had convinced him he was strong enough to counsel her alone, strong enough to resist temptation, was now telling him he could help her find redemption. His finger hovered over the reply button. The clock showed 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, it would be day 21 of his restoration prayer. Everything he'd worked for in the past weeks hung in the balance. The phone buzzed again. Another voice note from Nancy. The second voice note played, and Nancy's voice came through even more broken than before. "I was only 17 then," she whispered through tears. "I trusted him, my pastor. He was supposed to protect me, guide me. Instead," her voice cracked, "he took my innocence, Sam, my virginity. And then he threatened me, said if I ever spoke up, he'd tell his father, the senior pastor, that I was the one trying to seduce him." Sam's heart constricted. His hand gripped the phone tighter as Nancy continued. "After that, something broke in me. I couldn't trust spiritual leaders anymore. Every time I saw a passionate young preacher like you, I wanted to test them, to prove they were all the same, to show that their holiness was just a facade." Tears welled up in Sam's eyes. The righteous anger he felt toward her manipulative past began to melt into compassion. Her story painted a picture of a wounded soul, someone who had been violated in the worst way by someone in spiritual authority. "But you were different," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "When I was in your apartment, vulnerable, you didn't take advantage. And that scared me more than anything, because it meant that maybe there were still good people out there. Maybe faith wasn't dead after all." Sam sat in the darkness of his room, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The pastoral part of him wanted to reach out, to help heal this broken person. The restored part of him remembered the dangerous pattern of his fall. Yet another part wondered if this was God's plan, to use his painful experience to help someone else find redemption. His phone showed 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes until what should have been the triumphant conclusion of his 21-day restoration prayer. Instead, he sat there, tears streaming down his face, as the line between compassion and temptation grew dangerously thin. The recycle bin with Nancy's photos seemed to pulse like a beacon in his phone. His finger hovered over the WhatsApp message box. Pastor Johnson's warnings echoed in his mind. Complete deliverance requires complete separation. But so did Jesus' words, forgive 70 times 7. Sam had never felt more torn. Was this a divine appointment for ministry, or another carefully crafted snare? Was her story genuine, or another manipulation? And even if it was true, was he really the one who should help her heal? "I will think about it," Sam typed and sent quickly, then switched off his phone before he could see her response. But turning off his phone couldn't silence the thoughts racing through his mind. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning above him. Nancy's tearful confession played over and over in his head. The peaceful sleep that usually came after his long days of fellowship now eluded him completely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw different versions of Nancy. The seductress who had nearly destroyed his ministry, the wounded 17-year-old girl betrayed by her pastor, the seemingly repentant woman reaching out for help. Which version was real? Or were they all real, layers of a broken person? His mind wandered to the photos still lurking in his phone's recycle bin. They seemed to take on a different meaning now. Were they truly trophies of temptation, or evidence of a wounded soul's cry for help? Around 3 a.m. he got up and opened his Bible, hoping to find clarity. Instead, the verses seemed to pull him in opposite directions. "Bear one another's burdens," one page whispered. "Flee from sexual immorality," warned another. The moonlight streaming through his window cast shadows on his fellowship leadership badge, still lying on his desk where he'd placed it weeks ago. He picked it up, running his fingers over the embossed letters. How many other leaders had fallen into this same trap, believing they could be the one to heal a broken person, only to end up broken themselves? Dawn began to creep into his room, finding Sam still awake, still wrestling. His 21-day restoration prayer was supposed to end in triumph. Instead, here he was, caught between compassion and caution, between ministry and self-preservation, between trusting God's redemptive power and acknowledging his own weakness. His phone lay silent and dark on his bedside table, like a bomb waiting to explode.